Today's episode of True Crime with Kendall Rae is brought to you by DoorDash. And thanks to their support and support from viewers like you, today I'm able to make a donation to Mia and Sebastian's GoFundMe. I'm so excited to be partnering with DoorDash today because I am a longtime user of DoorDash. We've actually been using it in our house for at least 4 years. In fact, we love it so much that we actually use their premium feature of Dash Pass. And I think when people think of a local fulfillment platform, you're mostly thinking of food delivery, but you can get so much more through DoorDash. And there have been several times where it has really saved us. One example I can always remember is the time where I was so exhausted in the early days of having a newborn and realizing that I was on my last couple scoops of formula and I was exhausted. It was the middle of the night and I wasn't about to go get more. So I was able to get it through DoorDash. And that is just so convenient in times like that. DoorDash was founded 10 years ago with a simple mission: to grow and empower local economies. What started out as connecting customers with their favorite local restaurants has transformed into a multi-category marketplace where you can get pretty much anything from your local neighborhood delivered, from food to flowers, alcohol, retail items, and more straight to your door. And DoorDash is not just a delivery service. They are your trusted assistant, helping you navigate through the complexities of modern life. DoorDash is your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to get almost anything delivered. And if you use the code TCKR50, you can get 50% off up to $10 on your first order of $15 or more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Rae. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you, and be sure to click subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. So guys, today we're going to be talking about an absolutely heartbreaking case. I'm going to be discussing the very recent murder of Mia Campos and also her unborn son, Sebastian. By the time this episode goes up, it will be less than 2 months since Mia and her son were murdered. And because of that, it's an active and ongoing case, and therefore there could be updates that come out in between the time that I'm recording this and between the time it gets to you. So if that is the case, I will be sure to pin a comment with any updates or put it in the description box, something like that, so you guys can stay up to date on the case. Also, with this case being active and not going through trial yet, I do need to say that everyone I speak about in this episode is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. While Mia's family, the investigators, the prosecutors, and myself all feeling very strongly about who the guilty person here is, and I'm sure you will all agree, our justice system says that until they are convicted, they have the presumption of innocence, of course. But I really hope that by talking about this case, we can bring some more support and resources to this family who has just been through the worst thing that you can possibly go through. Mia Campos was only 16 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and not to mention her unborn son didn't even get the opportunity to begin his life. And since all of this has happened so suddenly and so shockingly for this family, they have really been, thrown into a world that they, I'm sure, never thought they would have to navigate. And I know they do have a lot of support, but the more support we can send their way, the better. So even though there is somewhat limited information on this case at this point in time, I wanted to cover it anyway and see if we can really uplift them during the next phase of this fight, which is not going to be easy for any of them. And so at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you some tangible ways that you can help to be an active true crime consumer, which is so important. And we hear from the families that we cover all the time just how much your support means to them. Not only just donations and signing petitions, things like that, but just the kind words. Like, I have had so many families reach out and just say the comment section or the love that we're getting, the support that we're getting just makes us feel like we're not in this fight alone. And that is such a vital thing for these families to have. That's what I hear over and over from families that we work with, is sometimes you can just feel so alone going through this process. Now, before we jump into the details of this case and exactly what happened here to Mia and Sebastian, I want to tell you more about what we do know about Mia and her life, who she was, and the circumstances, of course, that led up to her death. So Mia Campos was born the youngest to 5 siblings in 2008 to her parents Edward and Miriam, who have been incredibly strong during all of this. And they live in Loganville, Georgia, about 45 minutes east of Atlanta. Now, Mia's dad, Edward, was actually at one point a DJ. And while Mia was growing up, she took a similar liking to music. In fact, as a young teenager, she already started playing music at birthday parties and quinceañeras, and I can only imagine how proud that made her father to see her start to walk in his footsteps. And it wasn't just music that made Mia happy, it was everything. Her dad says that she was just a happy person all the time, and that is how they're always going to remember her.
She was a happy girl. She was always happy, always dancing. She loved music, she loved dance. She was everything. Happy all the time.
And according to her mom, Mia wasn't someone who made enemies. In fact, it seems like it was quite the opposite. She was someone who just had a genuinely good heart and a contagious smile, and it made her just an easy person to be around. She was even said to be popular among customers at Dunkin' Donuts, which is where she worked. But the most important thing about Mia that you need to know, and it was the most relevant thing going on in her life at the time, is the fact that in July of 2024, she was 7.5 months pregnant. Less than 2 months ago, she was getting ready to welcome her son into the world. And she had already picked out a name for him, Sebastian, and she and Sebastian should be here today. So when Mia actually became pregnant, she was 15 years old, which is obviously very young, and I know there are going to be very judgmental comments, so please try to hold back. There's nothing productive about that. And what's really important here is that even though Mia's family at first was shocked, they were, scared, I think, and every family handles and reacts to a teen pregnancy so differently. But one thing that I love about this family is that they made the decision to support Mia and love this new member of their family, no matter what the circumstances were around her pregnancy. Of course, like I said, it was shocking to them when they first found out, but they got on board and gave her nothing but love and support throughout her pregnancy. Even when Mia's brother, Alexis, who is very, very close with Mia, and I will be talking about him a lot in this episode, when he found out, he said he felt angry, upset, and even disappointed, which are all valid feelings to have. But, I think as time went on, they got more comfortable with the idea and realized that this was a blessing for them in a lot of ways, and that they just wanted to do everything they could to help her through this time and help her through navigating motherhood at such a young age. But if there's one big takeaway from this episode, it's that the Campos family is incredibly loving, incredibly close and strong, and they would do literally anything for Mia. And if that meant getting on board and just supporting Mia at the end of the day, no matter what, they were prepared to do that. And throughout this episode, I'm going to be playing several interview clips of their family, and I think you guys are just going to be so impressed with their strength and the way that they loved their daughter unconditionally, which is just so beautiful to me. And I want to start with this clip.
Well, we found out when she was pregnant. My wife, she was the one, she got pregnant. First, we was kind of upset because, 15 years old, it's like, it's normal. It's not normal for kids, to get pregnant at that age. But I was angry. I was upset. But 2 months later, when I see the belly, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, I just fell in love with my grandson, and I told her, you know what, Mija, you got our support, like a parent, you got 100% support, from your mom and myself. And it's like, don't worry about it. I say, you don't need anything, nobody, you don't need anything else from nobody. I said, you'll be good. Everything is good. Everything's going to be fine.
I was angry. I was really upset. I was really disappointed. I was mad. I wanted to find out where he lived and, do whatever a big brother has to do when they're mad. But I thought about Mia and I thought, I can't do that to her. I didn't want her to think that she made a big mistake.
I really loved both Alexis and Edward's message here. I feel like it really shows their love for Mia. There are so many teenagers out there who wouldn't get that same support from their family. And it's just amazing to see that even though this was a challenging time, they were up for the challenge. I'm so grateful that Mia had their support for many reasons, but especially because there was one person who didn't seem to want to support her, and that's the baby's father, Jesus Monroy. Now, Jesus and Mia were first introduced by Mia's brother, Alexis, but I want to be super clear here that it wasn't that kind of introduction. I mean, he wasn't intentionally trying to set them up or anything like that. That wasn't even on his mind. I mean, Jesus was 19 years old, so Alexis wasn't even thinking anything would happen because he was so much older than his sister. And I'm sure many of you are starting to think about the legality around that relationship, the fact that she was 15 years old and he was 19. And yes, we will be talking much more about that later on. But I also want to clarify that Jesus and Alexis were really not that great of friends either. I mean, they sort of traveled in similar circles, had like overlapping friendships, but it's not like they were all buddy-buddy with each other, you know? And it's honestly because Jesus wasn't a central person in their lives that it came as such a shock when they found out that he had gotten Mia pregnant. Nobody in the Campos family even knew that Mia and Jesus had been seeing one another until she announced her pregnancy. And by that point, whatever they were doing had already come to an end.
The way I see the story, they didn't have a good relationship in the beginning. It sounds like it was like maybe one time night that, they had whatever they had to do, and that's how he came out pregnant, but they really didn't have a good relationship because they never be around together. I mean, he came to the house to pick her up to go to the doctor's appointment because she was pregnant and drop her out, and it's about it.
I didn't think much of it, because I knew he was older, so he wouldn't try anything. And then I didn't really know much about them up until when I found out that she was pregnant by him up in, I think it was February or January.
And according to Mia's family, Jesus did not want to take responsibility for his son. As you just heard Edward say, he would come around here and there and take her to a few doctor's appointments, but there didn't seem to be much interest or really excitement beyond that, which for many families would rightfully make them very angry and upset, disappointed, all of those things. And I'm sure to some degree their family felt that way. But for the most part, it doesn't seem like that was necessarily the case. They made it super clear to him that he was not being forced to stay in the baby's life or even Mia's life, that they truly didn't need him. Mia herself, of course, did want him to be in the picture and wanted his help and support with their son, wanted her son to have his father in his life, but Edward actually gave Jesus the opportunity to just completely walk away. He actually told him that he needed to either man up and be a father, be in the baby's life, or he needed to leave because, quite frankly, like I said, they did not need him. And for as much as Edward wanted Jesus to walk away, he also respected what Mia wanted, which was for him to be part of their lives.
And I was like, you know what? And that's I told Jesus in front of his mom and his dad, I said, you know what? I said, either you be a real man or you walk away. I said, but I prefer if you walk away. But like I said, Mia, her wisdom was for him to be part of baby's father. The way he made me feel, he was more interested in economy, money-wise. I guess he was not ready. But it's like I was telling him the other day, when I met him the second time, I say, if you think you're not going to be a good father, just walk away. And I handle my daughter and my grandchild. Because we don't need you.
Which all of that really just tells you so much about this family, that they were willing to just let him off the hook, walk away completely, and take the responsibilities on for him, for Mia's sake and for Sebastian's sake, which is why what ends up happening is just so beyond frustrating. And that brings me to July 14th, 2024. Like I said, at that point, Mia was 7.5 months pregnant, and she and her family were preparing for the final stretch of her pregnancy. In fact, that day, she and her mom had gone shopping for things for her baby shower, and it could not have been a more normal morning and afternoon. Even that night seemed to be very typical for them. They were spending the evening together, just hanging out as a family, and there were truly no warning signs that Mia's life was in danger. But the reality is, it was in danger. Just before 10:30 p.m., Mia let her brother know that she was headed out for a few minutes to meet Jesus and that the two of them were going to run to a nearby Quick Trip gas station and grab some snacks. And this was actually a pretty common thing for them to do, and therefore, when she told her brother she was going to do this, Alexis didn't really think anything about it. Edward and Miriam were actually unaware that she was leaving, and at 10:31 p.m., the family's Ring doorbell captured Mia walking out of the door for the very last time. And it didn't take long for everyone to realize that something was wrong. When Mia didn't come back home after 30 to 45 minutes for a little excursion that should only have taken like 10 to 15 minutes, everyone in the house grew extremely worried. Which again, I think just says a lot about this family and how close-knit they are and how concerned and aware they are of each other. For them to notice such a small time discrepancy and already start raising the alarm so quickly. And so one by one, they began calling her. And when that was unsuccessful, they decided to call Jesus. The thing is, though, when they did call him, he did answer, but he said that he hadn't seen or even talked to Mia since the day before. Which of course didn't make any sense because Mia had told her brother that she was going to be with Jesus. So the fact that he was saying he hadn't seen her and that they weren't together was alarming to them right away. We know now that investigators believe he was lying, but at the time, her family was super concerned and confused as to where Mia was and who she was with. So Edward actually asked Jesus to come over, and he did. And he also brought his father along with him, and more on that later. But it wasn't long until they had a pretty solid lead. It turns out that Mia had her location enabled on the Life 360 app, and using that, her parents were able to gather some critical information. First of all, they realized that Mia's movements had stopped at 10:58 p.m., which was only 27 minutes after she left the house. And they also realized that she was only about a half a mile away. So of course, they immediately get into their car and they go to the location that the app says that she's at. And when they get there, they realize that her location isn't on the roadway, but the app is actually showing that her location is deeper into the tree line. So Edward and Jesus began walking up through the dirt and debris, and that's when they found her. Well, actually, that's when Jesus found her. Mia was found 20 to 30 feet from the roadway, face down and not breathing. Her nose was slightly bleeding, but there was no major signs of trauma. And I truly cannot imagine what that would be like to come across your child's body laying alone. Can't even talk about it. It's so horrible. But immediately Edward starts trying to do CPR, and unfortunately it was clear very quickly to him that he was too late to save her and to save her baby boy.
So when did you start to realize that something was off, when Mia wasn't coming home?
It was probably around, let's say, 10:45. By 11:15, that's when we started worrying, like, well, I mean, to go to the Kutrine combat, you're looking maybe not in even 30 minutes. That's when we start calling, because I called Mia and she didn't answer. Her mom called Mia, she didn't answer. My son called Mia, she didn't answer. And then we had to call another friend. She was real close with him, and he called her, and still she didn't answer. That's when we called Jesus. She was with him. She said no. I was at the house. I haven't talked to her. I haven't seen her since Saturday morning, that was another lie. And then he came with his father and said, like, well, if Mia, she's not with you, so where is she? I said, well, I don't know. I haven't talked to her. And that's when Asha came and showed me the app on her phone. And it's like, well, he's right here around the corner. So everybody jumped in the car and we went out there and looking for her. He was the one that he found her first, but because when we turned to the right side, because the app, he knew I was getting real close to her. And he just jumped real fast. He just jumped and he said, well, I already found her. She's right here. And then that's when I told my daughter, and it's like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? I said, wake up. And I started doing, CPR, and I couldn't get a response. And then I put my fingers on her neck, and there was no pulse. And it's like, no, I said, wake up, please wake up. And by the time I grabbed her hands, she was already cold.
Mia was found at 12:50 a.m., and by 1 a.m., emergency services had arrived on the scene. Officers were told by Mia's family that she had left the night before with an unknown person because by this point, they had been told by Jesus that she wasn't with him. which is why in the early reporting on this case, you'll actually see it mentioned that Mia was lured out of her home by an unknown person. But investigators didn't take long to connect the dots right back to Jesus. In those early morning hours of July 15th, the Campos family says that Jesus was not acting the way that they would expect someone to act after having just found the mother of their unborn child and their child dead. At one point, it was said that he had just fallen asleep in his car. And then at other points, he was very, very quiet and seemed to be completely unemotional.
Was he showing any emotion? Did he seem to react in a normal way?
No. It was like cold-blooded. It was like, oh, well. Because if that was the father, if he was the baby of the father, or I'm the father of the baby, I'm going to react differently. I'm going to react crazy. I'm going to cry. I'm going to like, what happened to my baby? Nothing. Because he knew. He knew what he did.
And of course, again, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, of course. But if that's not strange to you, listen to this. Alexis says that he was sitting next to Jesus on the side of the road while police were arriving on scene. And allegedly, Jesus leaned over to him and asked him not to tell the police that he was the father of the unborn child.
Later, once the police arrived to the scene with the medical examiners and everybody else, I sat next to him because he was on the sidewalk away from mostly everything. And the first thing he told me was, do me a favor, don't tell them that I'm the one that got me pregnant, that I'm the father of the son. And the first thing I told him was, that's not important right now. This is more important. And I told him he's really ignorant for thinking that instead of being more worried about Mia and his son, I carry a lot of guilt because I was the last one who saw her. And if I knew, I would have, could have, and I should have stopped her from leaving. But since it was such a normal thing, I didn't think much. And I carry most of the guilt because if I knew, then she would still be here.
And he wasn't just acting strange to the Campos family. Reporting on this case states that he was also being evasive and straight up lying to the police as well. According to an article from Court TV, police described their first encounter with Jesus as hesitant to tell the officer who he was and how he knew Mia. And this isn't surprising considering what he allegedly said to Alexis, but apparently to the police, he just said that he was a close friend of the family and did not share that he was the baby's father. And Marisol, Mia's sister, was actually standing next to him during this interaction, and she decided to speak up because she knew that he, of course, wasn't giving the full truth. In Spanish, she told him that he needed to, quote, tell the truth and not to lie. But after that, he decided he was done speaking. But he didn't stay silent days later on July 17th when he was brought in for a follow-up interview. And because he continued to lie to investigators, he was arrested for making false statements. And by this point, an autopsy had been completed and a medical examiner ruled that Mia's death was the result of a homicide and that her exact cause of death was asphyxiation. And at first in reporting, there was no mention of Jesus being considered a suspect in Mia's murder, but then on July 23rd, 2024, he was charged with malice murder, felony murder, feticide, and aggravated assault in the killing of Mia Campos and her unborn baby. And while Jesus is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, Mia's family feels very strongly that he is the person responsible for the murder of their daughter and their grandson. And I want to touch on a few more reasons why they feel so strongly about this. According to Edward, despite the fact that Jesus lived approximately 20 minutes away from their house, he seemed to arrive much quicker to their house when Mia was missing. And obviously that felt strange to him because if he were truly at home, like he said, it would have taken him longer to get there. Not to mention, he felt like it was pretty strange that his father also came with him. I mean, at that point, she was just missing. They weren't sure if anything had happened, so he just felt weird about it, and I totally get that. So, of course, he wonders if it's possible that Jesus had shared something with his father about what had happened. And again, this is just what Edward thinks, and there is no statement from authorities about this.
And the father didn't call Jesus until sometime closer to midnight to say, hey, she hasn't come home, she's not responding. And he came right over with his father, which Mia's father thought was a bit of a red flag. Why are you here with your dad? You know, you don't know that anything's wrong, but he feels that perhaps Jesus had shared with the father some information and the father may have known more than what they knew at the time.
And where does he live? Does he live in the same town?
In the same general area, but the family told me that he lived about 20 minutes away. That was another sort of red flag for Mia's father when he called Jesus and said, you know, we haven't seen her. We need you to come help us find her. He showed up pretty quickly. And the father thought that was odd.
Meaning that he wasn't home.
Right, like he had said. He said, I was at home, I wasn't with her. And the father's like, well, you got here awfully quick with your dad. So, you know.
And he has his own car, we believe.
Yes.
Okay.
And another thing that he thought was weird, and I think we can all agree that this is very strange and seems to be deliberate in my opinion, and many others, of course, but he was very quick to touch Mia's body when she was found. According to Edward, Jesus sort of like jumped on top of her and started touching her body when he first found her. And think about it. If they hadn't been together that day like Jesus was claiming, there would be no reason for his fingerprints to be on her. So Edward wonders if maybe he was trying to establish some sort of reason for his DNA to be on his daughter's body. And obviously that's just speculation. Who knows if he even had thought that far out, or if he was just trying to cause more of an emotional scene and make it seem like he was more upset. But I don't know. In my opinion, I think Edward's pretty spot on with that guess. So their family feels like that was a giant red flag. And another obvious red flag is the fact that his story didn't align with what Mia said she was doing that night. Unless she lied to her brother about who she was meeting up with, Jesus was the person that she went to see that night. And I'm sure most of you are thinking there's a pretty easy way to figure that out, and that's by looking at their cell phones. You know, if Jesus was with her that night, his location data is going to say that, or their text messages. And I imagine that investigators either have already done that or are in the process of doing that now. Okay, wow, I just found a huge update in the case. I knew that a preliminary hearing was happening today as I was recording this, so I wanted to see if anything came out of that, and a few things did. In this hearing, they confirmed that Jesus' phone was in the same area at the same time as when they believed Mia was killed. They also confirmed that Jesus and Mia had spoken that night after 8 p.m., even though Jesus said they hadn't. And before, when I said Jesus was arrested for making false statements, well, we learned in more detail during this hearing that this was why. In that follow-up interview that I mentioned earlier, Jesus said that he hadn't seen Mia on the 14th and that they hadn't spoken since 8 p.m. that night, which is 2.5 hours before she disappeared. But new information says that wasn't true. It turns out that when investigators were beginning to look through Mia's phone, they noticed that she had taken and saved a screen recording. And in this video, they could see that she recorded the messages between herself and Jesus where he is asking her to meet up. Investigators also saw that he was asking her not to tell people that she was meeting up with him and to delete their messages. He even told her to delete the messages from her recently deleted folder as well. And this screen recording was saved to her phone only minutes before she got into his car. And unfortunately, I get the feeling that she knew something was seriously wrong because 1, why else would she have taken that screen recording? And 2, after that at 10:37 p.m., she texted a friend saying that she was scared, and then she stopped replying altogether. Ultimately, all these messages are what led investigators to charge him with making false statements because he clearly had spoken to her after 8 p.m. These texts obviously allude to so much more, but at the time, it was enough to arrest him for making false statements before officially charging him with murder. We also learned that Jesus' attorney said that besides the phone data and testimony from the family, there was little evidence to actually prove that Jesus was with Mia that night. Although I would say, and I think most of you would agree, that his cell phone data placing him in the area that she died that night is pretty incriminating. Plus, Jesus admitted that he had his phone with him the entire night when he was questioned on the 17th, so it's not like he could claim someone else had it. But in the end of this hearing, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence based on the GPS coordinates and meetup text to move forward with the trial, which is great news. And let me just tell you that when it comes to his arrest, the Campos family says they are very appreciative of law enforcement's, quote, swift action, which is actually something that I wanted to point out. This case actually occurred in Gwinnett County, which may ring a bell for some of you. It's actually the same county and law enforcement agency that investigated the murder of Susana Morales. And if you aren't familiar with that case, I covered the murder of Susana Morales earlier this year, and she was also a 16-year-old Latina teenager, but her case was extremely mishandled. In fact, it was a police officer who was responsible for her murder. Not an officer from Gwinnett County, but still. Anyways, though, I found it comforting to know that Mia's case is being given the time and attention that it deserves, that it's a much different experience than the Morales family had. And I hope that for the sake of Mia, Sebastian, and the Campos family, and for the sake of getting justice, of course, that they continue to handle and investigate this case diligently. I wish Susana and her family had been given that, but some good news is recently her killer was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. What's also an interesting connection is Jesus is actually being represented by the same attorney that prosecuted Miles Bryant. But anyways, at this point in time, there are still, of course, quite a few things that we don't know. One of those things being motive and also where exactly she was killed. Based on the time that Mia left her house and when her phone stopped moving, there is a 27-minute window for when this crime took place. But as far as anything more specific than that, it just hasn't been officially released. And as I'm sure we are all aware, determining that information is going to be absolutely critical when it comes to getting a conviction in this case. Like I said, Jesus is facing a handful of charges for his alleged crimes, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, specifically the difference between malice murder and felony murder. For malice murder, the prosecution is going to have to establish premeditation, and I know a lot of us, when we think of premeditation, we think days, weeks, even months of planning ahead of time. But that is not the case here, because in the state of Georgia, premeditation can actually be formed in just a matter of seconds. So that's one charge. Then we have felony murder, which does not require premeditation. To be convicted of this charge, prosecutors will have to prove only that the defendant intended to commit the felony that led to the victim's murder. So in this case, aggravated assault is the felony, and they will have to prove that he intended to commit that. Jesus is also charged with feticide, which is the act of killing a fetus, and I don't think I need to explain how that occurred here. Plus, of course, the fourth and final charge of aggravated assault. And actually, that's not necessarily where Jesus' charges are going to end. And I mean, officially, that's where they end as of right now, what's been filed at this point. But Edward says that they are planning to file an additional charge of statutory rape. I'm sure many of you are wondering about this, but if you are not familiar with what that means exactly, as I mentioned earlier, Mia was only 15 years old when she got pregnant, and Jesus was 19, which means, legally speaking, she was not old enough to consent. In Georgia, the legal age of consent is 16 years old. And legally speaking, what Jesus did meets the definition of statutory rape. And in Georgia, that is punishable by a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 20 years in prison. Edward actually says that they were planning to file these charges against Jesus as soon as they found out Mia was pregnant, but she didn't want them to do that because she knew that it meant her son wouldn't have his father in his life. And I completely understand her reasoning for that, and I understand why her parents wanted to file those charges anyway, but decided to respect her wishes. It's just so sad thinking about the fact that she gave him so many chances to do the right thing by her and her baby, and for him to just turn around and do this, allegedly do this, I should say at this point, it's just heartbreaking, and it makes no sense. That is what is just so confusing, so maddening, so angering about this case, is that he was given an out. As we heard Edward say earlier, there was no obligation for him to stay in their lives to support Mia and Sebastian. Their family said, "You can leave. We got this." And he still felt the need to take her life. I just do not understand. I mean, it doesn't make sense in any scenario like this, but especially when they gave him that opportunity to just leave and he felt the need to kill both of them. I will never understand. And I can't imagine being in the shoes of this family and trying to make sense of that, trying to understand how they did everything right and were planning to 100% support Mia and her baby through this teen pregnancy, help raise that child. And now they're here. And all they can hope for is justice at the end of the day. And I think that is what we are all hoping for. And what's really heartbreaking to think about is the fact that the month that this episode is going live, it's the month that should have been the start of a beautiful future for their family, for her, for Sebastian. But instead, it's going to be a month filled with a lot of pain for her loved ones, unimaginable pain. And so today, I'm hoping that we can all really show up for the Campos family and give them as much of our support as we can. And one way that I know we can help this family is by making a donation to their GoFundMe, which was started by Mia's mother to help cover funeral expenses. Mia and Sebastian's funeral and celebration of life was held back in July. However, it's not too late to help cover those expenses. It can be very costly. And additionally, if the Campos family is going to pursue statutory rape charges against Jesus, that will undoubtedly be costly as well. I will, of course, be making a donation on behalf of my audience and this channel. But if you are able to make an additional donation as well, I'm sure they will greatly appreciate it. And as I always say, any amount helps. Even just the support of getting a small donation goes a long way. And as I mentioned earlier, another way that you can absolutely support this family is just by sending them words of strength, encouragement, kindness. That stuff goes a long way. Just letting them know that they're not alone in this fight and that you stand beside them and want to see justice for Mia and Sebastian. And even if, it's great to type those and leave comments, things like that. But even if that for you is prayer, maybe, and sending positive thoughts, whatever that may look like for you, all of that, I think, goes a long way. And I also just want to say I am so, so impressed by this family's strength that they have been able to do a few interviews and speak with such strength, such conviction, and really hold it together. I don't know if I could do it, especially with this happening so recently. I just really admire them and their support for Mia throughout all of this, leading up to all of this happening. Just their closeness, their bond is all really beautiful to see and inspiring to me. And I also wanted to say something to Alexis, just in case he sees this. It breaks my heart listening to you talk about how much guilt that you carry for what happened to your sister. And I just hope you know that truly none of this was your fault. And, you couldn't have done anything differently to protect her. That pain has to be so great. And I am so sorry to you and to your entire family. I hope moving forward that you can all find peace and just know that justice is on the horizon. I truly believe that it is. I think we are going to see that. And I look forward to the day that I can update all of you that this has happened. That is all I have for you on this case at this point in time. Again, I just wanted to send my best to this family. I am just heartbroken for you guys. There are no words to explain how horrendous this is. And Mia was just so beautiful, so young. Seemed like she had so much going for her. She had her whole life ahead of her. And not to mention Sebastian, who didn't even get to begin his life. But that is all I have for you at this point in time on this case, you guys. I will be back next week, of course, to discuss another case. But until then, stay safe out there.